Hello my dear friends, you're in the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 10th of April of 2024. Today we have lots of very interesting updates, so let's start. And first let's talk about Kharkiv direction. We have lots of very interesting updates. The Ukrainians continue the rescue situation, rescue operations all over the line of combat contact due to the Russian strikes of missiles and air aviation bombs. Furthermore, the Ukrainians from their side continue reconnaissance operation along the border, trying to discover and trying to find the concentration of Russian forces, and by these operations they just try to understand and project the possible direction of Russian attack. As I understand, the Ukrainians still don't know where exactly the Russians are going to move, either in direction of Kupiansk or Kharkiv or Vovchansk, or in direction of Kazachий Lahir, Kazachий Lopань, or the town by the name of Bogodukhov. So the Ukrainians don't know. From the other side, the Russians continue bombing and attacking the Ukrainian forces along the border, trying to destroy the areas of concentration, and the most important, the Russians try to destroy the positions of, let's say, Ukrainian engineering forces who create or who are building the constructions and the fortifications along the border. So the Russians understand that for now it's too early to start offensive operation because maybe they're not ready, but the thing that they can do right now is to attack the, let's say, construction equipment and the engineering forces of armed forces of Ukraine who are involved in the building process. So this is like the tactics, very interesting one. And we have once again the video of how the Russians managed to discover the concentration of D-30 howitzer in the vicinity of Avdiivka, and as a result of Iskander strike, that concentration of artillery systems were destroyed. Now we are moving to Kupiansk direction, more precisely to the south. In Kupiansk direction we have additional updates from the territory. Once again, as you can see, we have adjusted the map because the Ukrainians managed to counterattack, and they continue their counterattacks on the Russian positions, and under the pressure of Ukrainian fire and Ukrainian forces, the Russians were forced to fall back. On this video we can see the counterattack of the 60th Mechanized Brigade, and as you can see, the Ukrainian tank almost reached the Russian positions and was attacking the Russians from a very short distance without any resistance from any barriers from the Russian side. Now this is very important. I would like to remind you once again, if we increase the numbers of updates, let's say since 20th of March, this is the updates from the 20th of March. I'll remind you that on the 20th of March we got this video of another Russian attempt to storm Terny. On this video we can see on the 20th of March the movement of Russian personnel carrier, and at some point the Ukrainians start attacking the Russians with all types of weapons they have. The Russians managed to land their infantry, but the entire storm squad was destroyed. So as you can see, by 20th of March, the Russians managed to reach this line. So this was, let's say, the edge Russian positions in front of Terny, and the distance between the edge Russian positions in Terny the distances were less than, let's say, 700 meters. So it was very close, on the distance of the short rifle fire. But we remember that during the previous, let's say, months, during the previous days, the Ukrainians established complete FPV drone superiority in the area, and the Ukrainians managed to repel significant number of Russian attacks towards Terny with just FPV drones and cluster rounds, and the Russians, to tell the truth, were very exhausted. They become very exhausted after those attacks. They lost significant number of armored vehicles, tanks, electronic warfare equipment, and basically the Russians currently don't have enough of resources, let's say, to continue offensive operation further, at least when talking about the geolocations and videos we received. So that's why after the Ukrainians realized that they managed to deal significant damage to the Russians, the Ukrainians decided to start checking and to start testing the Russian defense, let's say, on the territories that Ukrainians were forced to fall back during the Russian counteroffensive. And just since 20th of October till 10th of April, so let's say for around 21 days, the Ukrainians managed to restore positions and restore control over the territory more or around 1.4 kilometers. So these territories was restored by the Ukrainians during their very slow step-by-step counteroffensive that they started in the end of March and till today, 10th of April. Very likely the Ukrainians will continue their counteroffensive because they understand the Russian problems and the Russian losses. I'm not sure, and I don't think that Ukrainians are going to, let's say, to counterattack even towards Kremenaya or Terny, but very likely if the Ukrainians, let's say, do everything smart, they can, let's say, reach reach this line, and this of course significant progress, and of course the Russians can be forced to fall back to the right of this yellow line, and this is going to be obviously not very good for the Russians, of course, because they were about to reach Terny, and now they were forced to fall back under the Ukrainian pressure. But from the other side, we start receiving very interesting videos for between Yampolovka and Tarskoye. This one. On this video, for example, we can see the Russian FPV drone strikes against Ukraine machine gun positions. And when, let's say, discussing this video and when analyzing this video, we can make a conclusion that despite the problems on direction of Terny, the Russians managed to redeploy and to bring some FPV drone operators to Tarskoye salient, and the Russians start attacking the Ukrainian positions along the tree lines, which is obviously the first stage before the operation on the ground. So currently it's maybe too early to make conclusions on Terny direction, because the Russians start using FPV drones, and FPV drones is a very unique and rare footages on this direction. For some reason the Russians hasn't been using this type of weapon at least till the 10th of April. So this is the situation in the southern Kupiansk direction. Now we're moving to Bilogorovka. We have lots of interesting details and updates. So we know that the latest update, we received important update that the Russians managed to enter the let's say landfill. Currently we don't have any updates whether the Russians managed to improve their positions or to establish complete control. The only thing we know is the Russians continue pummeling, continue clearing the positions and the trenches of the armed forces of Ukraine on the southern part of the village, of the landfill. For now, the Russians still haven't conducted even a single ground operation, but due to the concentration of Russian FPV drone fire, very likely that during the next few days the Russians will make another attempt. But the most important updates are coming from the village by the name of Verkhnyakamyanska. This is the village. And today the Russian sources published the video of offensive operation in direction of that village. More precisely, the Russians were storming this stronghold. As you can see, this is a very powerful stronghold, very big one, and this is one of the most important and the base of defense on the Siversk direction. And of course, if this stronghold falls, the Russians will be able to enter Verkhnyakamyansk itself and then to move further to the western direction of Siversk. So the Russians published, to be more precisely, the Ukrainians published the video of Russian attacks. And let's say on this episode, and particularly on this episode, we can see the shape of the stronghold. Take a look at the map. We see this, let's say, shape of the stronghold, and we see the same shape on the video. And we see 4 Russian stormtroopers moving from one part of the stronghold to another. So the Ukrainians are showing us the process of the clearing of the trenches and storming of the trenches by the Russian infantry. Currently we don't know for sure whether the Russians managed to establish complete control of the trenches or not, but the thing we can tell for sure is that the Russians managed to bypass the fields and to enter the fortifications. Very likely within the next few days, or one day, or maybe during the upcoming night, we're going to receive more updates and details about the territory. Maybe we're going to see the entire, let's say, stronghold under the Russian control. And if the Russians are able to capture the stronghold, then the Russians will get the access to Verkhnyakamyanska village. The village Verkhnyakamyanska is located to the west of Verkhnyakamyanka and to the east of the Siversk. The length of the, let's say, the village that is under Ukrainian control is around 4.3 kilometers. Of course, it's not very, let's say, easy trip. There is just one street and significant number of buildings that are connected between each other with, let's say, rich network of fortifications and the trenches. Obviously it will take maybe a month, maybe less, for the Russians to clear this area with FPV drones and artillery. But if the Russians are able to get the eastern outskirts of the village, obviously in 1 day, in 1 week, in 1 month, the Russians will be able to reach the western outskirts of the village, and then the Russian positions are going to be like something like this. And from this distance, from this direction to Siversk, the distance is less than 4 kilometers. So using tanks, you can already attack the edge positions of the armed forces of Ukraine on the eastern part of Siversk. So this is very important update. And furthermore, the Russians are pushing not just in direction of Verkhnyakamyansk and so on. The Russians are pushing from Bilogorovka to the north in direction of Avdiivka. As you can see, we have significant number of geolocations on the territory of FPV drones, of artillery strikes, more precisely of multiple launch rocket strikes on the area. The Russians were bombing this territory heavily. Probably this is another episode of artillery preparation before further Russian attempts to attack. We have, as you can see, significant number of FPV drone strikes. The Russians were clearing the trenches and the areas along the railways heavily from the Ukrainian sources and soldiers. So very likely within the next few days we're going to see another attempt of the armed forces of Russian Federation to move further to the north in direction of the railway station Avdiivka. So the Russians, as you can see, are moving along two directions: Bilogorovka, Siversk from the southeast to the northwest, and the second direction is Verkhnyakamyanska, then to Siversk as well. So two directions are the priority for the Russians. There are very heavy clashes in Bilogorovka, and very likely the Russians are about to start offensive operation in Krasnohorivka. So obviously Siversk is going to be the next Russian target. Now we are moving to the south in direction of Bakhmut, Artyomovsk direction. We got a significant number of updates and details from this territory. We haven't received even a single geolocated confirmation of further Russian progress, but despite the fact, we received significant number of details and updates about the current situation and possible next Russian steps on this direction. And very important notes that I would like to discuss with you. For example, on that video, we just seen the work of the pair of Su-25 on the direction. These planes were supporting the Russians in their offensive. Now let's move back to, let's say, Chasiv Yar. As you can see, the eastern part of Chasiv Yar is under very heavy Russian fire. The Russians continue using FAPs. The Russians continue using FPV drones, artillery systems to destroy the Ukrainian forces, Ukrainian reinforcements, reserves, and everything that Ukrainians sent on the direction to slow down and to stop the Russians. So lots of videos that we have already discussed. Let's move to the north, and the most important video from Bogdanovka is coming from the, let's say, south western part. Let's take a look at the video. On this video we can see the Ukrainians who were abandoning their positions, who retreats towards Kalinovka, and as you can see the Ukrainians were withdrawing their positions under very heavy Russian artillery fire. So this video doesn't mean that the Russians have already captured the let's say abandoned Ukrainian positions, but very likely the Russians are about to capture, or maybe they have already captured, who knows. So anyway, the Ukrainians left the south western part of Bogdanovka towards Kalinovka, and the Ukrainians were moving using this road. So very likely the next few days we're going to receive some geolocations from this part of the territory, and we will color the area into the red color, into the Russian controlled territory color. Now we are moving to the most important area, and we are talking about Seversky Donetsk Donbass Canal. This is the area, and as you can see, this is the water barrier first of all, and it's not so easy to redeploy, to send forces from one part of Chasiv Yar to another, because the Russians are very close to, let's say, the main supply roads. We have already calculated the distance between the edge Russian positions and canal itself. So for example, the distance from this direction is less than 1.5 kilometers. Let's say the distance from possible Russian positions to the northwest of Ivanovska to canal from this direction is less also than 1.5 kilometers. So what does it mean? Let's take a look at this video. On this video we can see the light Ukrainian vehicle, probably evacuation machine, or maybe the machine that brought some food supply support, and then the Ukrainians in that car were heading back to the central part of Chasiv Yar, but that vehicle was destroyed. Currently it's very difficult to understand what kind of weapon the Russians were using to destroy that light vehicle. Maybe that was, let's say, a drone strike, maybe that was anti-tank missile, and maybe that was, let's say, the mine that the Russians used and established here using the distance mining method, and the weapon by the name of Zemlyedelye. Currently it's unknown, and it's not important. The most important that, according to this video, we can make a conclusion that the Russians established complete fire control over the main supply road that goes from the central Chasiv Yar to the eastern Chasiv Yar, and the Ukrainians are no longer able to use this road, or if they use, they're gonna have significant losses, and this video confirmed this. So, and this is very important. So basically we can say that Ukrainians who are currently located in this part of Chasiv Yar is already cut off from the mainland and are no longer able to have some supply and support. The only way they can have support is the road that goes, let's say, along the railways. This is the road. This is the only possible solution for the Ukrainians, this road, or maybe from Kalinovka itself, also through the forest into the eastern part of Chasiv Yar. Furthermore, very interesting updates are coming to the north. Updates are coming from the area to the northwest of Ivanovska. According to different mappers, the Russians have already established control over these hills, over these forests, and so on. So, according to very reliable mappers, this area is already under the Russian control, but And as you can see, the Russians are getting closer and closer to the same canal, but the most important videos are coming from this area. As you can see, also from the area of possible supply road, of possible evacuation road, and the area that Ukrainians can use, let's say, for evacuation or for sending additional reinforcement. Let's take a look at this video. On this video, we can see Seversky Donetsk Donbass canal under very heavy fire, of the armed forces of Russian Federation. The Russians were bombing this territory with multiple launch rocket systems, with artillery. And we see that it's not just like attacks, it's not just fire or artillery control over most important supply road. This is also looks like artillery preparation before further offensive operation. Because if the Russians are pushing from northwest of Ivanovska to Canal, obviously sooner or later the Russians will reach as close as possible to this area, and then the main clashes for the territory is going to start. On this video we can see the same episode, the same video, not the same video, the same area, but from another angle and a different, let's say, period of day, and the Russians were bombing the Ukrainian fortifications on the hill. The Russians, as a result of artillery strike, managed to destroy the Ukrainian local ammo depot. There was a fire then and a secondary detonation. So very likely, due to these videos and geolocations, we can make a conclusion that if everything goes well, the Russians very likely will storm this area very soon with the purpose to cross Seversky Donetsk Donbass canal and to answer the block of Chasiv Yar by the name of Novy, this one. Because we can make this conclusion based on many, let's say, geolocations, facts. The first one is we see certain Russian activity of artillery. The second one, we receive reports from different reliable mappers about further Russian progress to this area. And the third evidence is that during the previous few weeks, the Russians were over-concentrated on this territory, using significant number of FABs and different types of weapon. Just a few days ago, on the 8th of April, we received this video of how the Russians were bombing, not just bombing, but reducing this territory to ruins, to ground, with significant number of aviation bombs, with different types of weapon. We can see the secondary detonation, and obviously this picture tell us that the Russians probably have some certain goals and some certain plans about this part of Chasiv Yar. Because if the Russians, if they're able to penetrate the Ukrainian defense belt and to enter this block, let's say, and to establish control over this territory with by bypassing the eastern block of Chasiv Yar, then the Ukrainians will got encircled and will appear in a cauldron. Obviously, the Ukrainians will not allow this situation, and basically they will fall back much more earlier, and they will abandon their positions, and they will give this eastern part of Chasiv Yar without clashes, without any resistance. Now we are moving further to Konstantinovka. The Russians continue bombing and attacking the town. Another concentration of Ukrainian forces was under very heavy Russian fire of Iskander strike. Another concentration and temporary position was destroyed. And that's it. Probably no more updates about this part of the line of combat contact. Now we are moving to Avdiivka. We have lots of very interesting updates. The Russians continue offensive operation to the north of Berdichi. We have different mappers confirming the Russian progress, and we have geolocation of Ukrainian FPV drone strike against the Russian abandoned personnel carrier. As a result of attack, the carrier was damaged probably or destroyed. But this video first of all confirms the additional Russian progress to the north of Berdichi. And if we continue thinking let's say, projecting where the Russians are planning to move, obviously the Russians are trying to bypass this water reservoir and to start offensive on the Ukrainian positions in Berdichi from the north direction. But to do this, first of all, the Russians need to secure the area and to establish control over these trenches and fortifications and the tree lines on the territory. As soon as the Russians are able to do this, then the Ukrainians basically will be forced to fall back from Berdichi due to risk of being encircled by the Russian armed forces, and the Ukrainians will try to fall back, obviously in direction of Novobakhmutovka. Furthermore, the sources reported that the Russians during the previous 24 hours managed to repel 11 counterattacks of the armed forces of Ukraine, and the Russians repelled their attacks also in the area of Novobakhmutovka and in the area of Vadianne, Pervomayska, Novokalinovo. And furthermore, we received some reports about further Russian progress. Additional Russian progress on the southwest and the western part of Novokalinovo. Yet we haven't received any geolocations, but we're just keeping this piece of information in our mind. Now we're moving to Pervomayska. Today the Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation haven't provided us any details or any updates whether the Russians managed to establish complete control over the village, despite the video of Russian flag on the western outskirts of the town. Very likely the Ukrainians conducted counteroffensive, and just we discussed in the previous post that the Ukrainians conducted 11 counterattacks on the direction, and maybe as a result of one of those counterattacks, the Russians were forced to fall back from the western part of Pervomaisk. For now, we don't have any geolocations confirming this. I'm just wondering why the Ministry of Defense haven't provided us these updates. But anyway, regarding the absence of this report in the Ministry of Defense, let's say note, obviously the Russians in about a day or two will establish complete control over the territory. Important thing is that the Russians managed to break through the Ukraine defense belt in direction of Yasnobrodovka, and currently this territory is already cut into two pieces. Very likely the next few days we're going to receive more updates, and the first let's say updates of clashes on the outskirts of the village by the name of Yasnobrodovka. Some sources reported that during the previous 24 hours the Russians conducted another attack towards Umanska, and the sources reported that very likely the Russians entered the first buildings in the village. For now we haven't received even a single geolocation confirming this. Now we are moving to Krasnohorivka, where the situation continues develops completely not in Ukrainian favor. More geolocations, more videos confirming the Russian additional progress on the territory, and the most important is that during the previous 24 hours the Ukrainians conducted a significant number of counterattacks trying to force the Russians to fall back. The Ukrainians were completely surprised with significant Russian attack, how they managed to break through the Ukrainian defense belt and to enter almost the central part of Krasnohorivka. The Ukrainians sent significant number of personnel carriers, armored vehicles to slow down and to stop the Russians and to counterattack them, but most of those counterattacks were repelled by the Russians, and the Ukrainians, having significant losses, were forced to fall back. And after the Ukrainians realized that they lost the southern and the southeastern part of Krasnohorivka, the Ukrainians decided to bomb this territory with J-dam bombs, and probably this is like the act of complete fail of the armed forces of Ukraine, because they understand that they are no longer able to return control. So that's why they need and they should damage this territory as much as possible with J-dam bombs. But anyway, regarding the Ukraine counterattacks and the use of heavy weapon, some Russian sources reported about complete control over the intersection of the Vatutina and Gelagichная streets. So according to some Russian sources, this territory was captured by the Russians, and the Russians managed to dig in deeper. For now, we don't have any geolocations confirming this, but very likely something like this happened during the previous 24 hours. From the other side, we received significant number of aviation strikes and bombings of decaying positions in the center of Krasnohorivka, and the situation develops so badly for the Ukrainians, so we can make a conclusion that very likely the Russians are not going to use the Nivolskaya Krasnohorivka offensive operation, because the Ukrainians will be forced probably to fall back from this area as soon as the Russians reached the outskirts of the central industrial area, this plant, because the main Ukrainian stronghold is located here, and the Russians, let's say, in front of this area within, let's say, less than 1 kilometer, so 500 meters, and the Russians can start the clashes for this industrial zone. And if the Ukrainians lose this industrial zone, they will start obviously falling back from the town itself. So the battle for Krasnohorivka can be finished even faster than any other battle in the special military operation for the strongholds of the level like this. We haven't received anything from Novomikhailivka, just a regular activity, FPV drone strikes, nothing special. The same story about Staromayorsk-Urozhaine. The Russians managed to establish control over the first lines to the south of Staromayorsk. The Ukrainians conducted few counterattacks, but all their counterattacks were repelled by the Russians, and the Ukrainians, being defeated, were forced to fall back to the northern part, further to Velika Novosilovka. And while the Ukrainians were moving back, or probably while the Ukrainians were trying to concentrate forces for another counterattack, the Russians bombed the Ukrainian concentration of forces and temporary positions with FABs. And after that, there were no more wishful thinking about any counteroffensive on the Russian positions. We haven't received anything interesting from Rabotina area. And now after we discuss the updates about the situation on the ground, I would like to discuss with you one important video that today, two videos that today the Ukrainian sources started publishing. Let's take a look at this video, and this video was published by the Armed Forces of Ukraine, and on this video we can see something very interesting. On this video we can see how the Ukrainian reconnaissance drone first managed to discover the position of Russian electronic warfare equipment, and after that the Ukrainians damaged and destroyed this vehicle with Ukrainian Lancet. So that was probably the first video of the use of this type of weapon on the line of combat contact, not like test mode, but a real combat, let's say, use. And this in the same area we got another video of the use of Ukrainian Lancet against the Russian positions and the Russian forces. So this is very important because, as we can see, the Ukrainians start creation of their own Lancet, model, drones, and very likely the Ukrainians are going to increase the production of this type of weapon. The only question I have, where exactly the Ukrainians are located right now? In the early 1941, when comparing with the Second World War, or in the late 1945, when nothing can help the Ukrainians to win the special military operation, even if they create something wonder weapon, it's anyways not going to help them, because the entire conflict is coming to the final phase of the special military operation. And when talking about Kiev, as we discussed, there's going to be no demobilization. There's going to be just mobilization of people from 25 till 60 years old. Everybody will serve in the Ukrainian army. Nobody will escape mobilization, and every single Ukrainian, every single man, sooner or later will be sent to the line of combat contact to fight with the Russians. It's very bad for the Ukrainians. It's very bad for Ukraine, and I don't know what to say even more. Furthermore, some Ukrainians during the previous 24 hours tried to escape Ukraine. Those were probably the lightest and the final batches of the Ukrainians who were trying to try their luck and to leave this territory, but they were captured by the Ukrainian detachment unit, and probably after that they were sent somewhere to the training center, after which they will be sent probably to some, I don't know, Kupiansk, or let's say southern Kupiansk direction or something like this. Furthermore, the Ukrainians are saying that they also adopted according to new mobilization law, they will start mobilization among the prisoners. There is going to be no, let's say, I want to serve in army or not. Every single Ukrainian prisoner, first of all, will be sent to the war. They will not be asked by the Ukrainian authorities, and this is going to be obviously another, let's say, bad page of the Ukrainian democracy in 2024. And that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds to condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.